Imagine hiring a brand new operations manager, right? You spend 90 days meticulously training them, integrating them into your culture, and, getting them up to speed on all your proprietary software.
Which is a huge investment of time and money,
What
obviously.
massive. But then on day 91, they walk into your office and announce they are taking 38 weeks of fully job-protected leave.
Wow. Yeah, that's right.
And under New Jersey's incoming laws, there is absolutely nothing you can do about it. You literally just have to keep their exact chair warm for the better part of a year.
It sounds like a hypothetical thought experiment from some business school ethics class,
Mhm.
honestly. But it is the very real operational puzzle that human resource departments across the state are about to face.
And well, since you were sitting right there in the room on May 14th, 2026 at the NJFLA Compliance Summit, you already know we're not dealing in hypotheticals
Oh, no,
today.
not at all.
We are custom tailoring this deep dive directly to the materials from that event just for you. Our mission is to really unpack the recording, the slide deck, and, the massive strategic implications of these incoming changes to New Jersey's leave laws.
It is a totally critical mission, especially given the timeline we're working with here. John Sharp, the president of Hardenberg Insurance Group, kicked off the summit by basically putting the calendar front and center.
Right, the deadline.
Exactly. Employers only have until July 17th, 2026. That is the hard deadline when the statutory thresholds drop and this whole new paradigm just takes over.
Which is, it's incredibly aggressive when you consider the massive blind spot we are all dealing with right now.
Oh, the state regulations.
Yes, the actual official state regulations, the administrative rule book that literally explains how the state expects you to implement these statutes won't even be published until July.
It's wild. You are expected to be fully compliant practically the exact moment the ink dries on the state's guidelines.
Yeah, John Sharp set that table perfectly before handing the floor over to the main event, Louis Lessig.
Widely known in the industry as the employment law translator.
Right. And reviewing a recording of his session, his whole approach is just striking. He didn't rely on that standard, boring seminar intro where the speaker politely asks everyone to, silence their devices.
No, he demanded the exact opposite, actually.
He told everyone to take their cell phones out immediately and log into a live anonymous polling software called Poll Everywhere.
Which is such a brilliant mechanism for establishing a true baseline of reality in a room. Because when you ask a room full of professionals to raise their hands if their company's out of compliance, nobody moves.
Oh, of course not. No one wants to admit that out loud.
Right. But by making the polling interactive and completely anonymous, Lessig forced the entire room to engage honestly with the frightening compliance gaps within their own organizations.
You could admit you had no earthly idea how your payroll system was going to handle these changes without, the CEO sitting 2 rows back finding out.
Exactly.
Since you were in the room, you already know the headline math that had everyone totally glued to those poll results. The New Jersey Family Leave Act, the NJFLA, is dropping its coverage threshold from employers with 30 employees down to just 15 employees.
A huge drop.
But okay, let's unpack this, because there's an operational trap hidden inside the new employee eligibility numbers, and that's where the real nightmare lies.
The eligibility drop is staggering. I mean, previously an employee needed 12 months of service and 1,000 actual hours worked just to qualify for this leave.
And now?
As of July 17th, that plummets to just 3 months of service and a mere 250 actual hours worked.
Wait, okay, let's walk through the actual logistics of that 250-hour requirement. If an employee works a standard 40-hour week, they hit 250 hours in, 6 weeks?
Lovely 6 weeks, yes.
So even part-time, or if you factor in standard 90-day probationary periods, a new hire hits that threshold almost immediately after their onboarding is complete.
What's fascinating here is that you've identified the exact vulnerability Lessig highlighted at the summit. The whole mechanism of a probationary period, which historically was designed to evaluate a candidate's long-term fit before committing to full benefits, is now completely inverted.
Right, because the law legally entitles them to extensive leave the very moment they become fully trained and viable to the company.
Precisely. Companies are going to have to fundamentally rethink their recruitment and staffing pipelines.
How does an HR department even adapt to that? You can't just pause hiring, but you also clearly can't rely on the people you just hired to actually be in the building.
You might have to overhire. If your historical data says you need to hire 3 people to ensure 2 make it through probation and become productive, you might now need to hire 5.
Just anticipating that one or two will trigger their leave eligibility immediately upon finishing training.
Exactly. The state has effectively shifted the entire operational risk of life events away from the individual and placed it squarely onto the employer's balance sheet.
Wow. Which brings us to the next structural shift, I guess. Because to really understand the gravity of this, we need to clarify the alphabet soup of New Jersey leave. Historically, these different programs served very different functions, didn't they?
They did. Let's define the mechanisms real quick. First, you have NJTDI, which is New Jersey Temporary Disability Insurance.
Okay.
This is the bucket of funding utilized when the employee themselves has a medical condition, so an injury, a surgery, or a pregnancy.
Got it.
Then you have NJFLI, the New Jersey Family Leave Insurance, and this is the bucket utilized when the employee needs time to care for a seriously ill family member or to bond with a newborn or newly adopted child.
And historically, both TDI and FLI were purely financial mechanisms, correct? Like they were wage replacement programs so you could pay your mortgage while you were out, but they did not guarantee your job would be waiting for you when you got back.
That is the pivotal distinction. They were about cash, not job security. But under the new laws taking effect on July 17th, strict job protection is baked directly into both NJTDI and NJFLI.
So they have to bring them back.
Yes. Employees who utilize these benefits are legally entitled to be restored to the exact same role or highly similar role with equivalent pay and status upon their return.
Wait, I need to stop you there. Let's stack the math on this because Lessig ran the numbers at the summit and the duration is just wild. An employee can take up to 26 weeks of temporary disability insurance, right?
Correct. 26 weeks.
And then they can immediately stack that with 12 weeks of family leave insurance.
Yes, consecutive usage is totally permitted.
Wait, so what does this all mean? That's 38 total weeks. An employee could technically be gone for almost 3/4 of the year, 38 weeks out of 52, and a small business with just 15 people is legally required to keep their exact chair warm.
Yes.
Surely there is like an undue hardship exemption for small businesses in these regulations, right?
In short, no. There was no convenient escape hatch for small businesses just because the absence is inconvenient or really expensive.
You're kidding.
Not at all. If the state determines the employee qualifies for the leave, the employer must accommodate the absence and guarantee the job restoration. You basically have to either utilize temporary staffing or force your remaining team members to just absorb the workload.
But finding a highly specialized temporary worker who is willing to take a strictly 38-week contract is virtually impossible in today's labor market. You are essentially hiring a full-time employee who you then have to fire the absolute moment the original employee returns.
Which is exactly why businesses are going to react drastically to this. When sweeping mandates impose unmanageable operational burdens, markets adapt aggressively.
Oh, this makes me think of the McDonald's automation story Lessig brought up.
Yes, it's a brilliant historical comparison to illustrate this exact type of market reaction.
It was a fascinating pivot. He pointed out how, a few years ago, the federal government was proposing massive overhauls to overtime rules, while simultaneously various states were aggressively hiking minimum wage mandates.
Right, and the margins in the fast food industry are already razor thin.
Yeah.
So when you mandate a sudden, massive increase in the cost of human capital, those businesses cannot simply absorb the cost. The financial mechanism just breaks.
So the market adapted. The industry realized they couldn't afford the regulatory and financial burden of human labor under those new rules, so they aggressively accelerated automation.
Exactly.
Those giant touchscreen ordering kiosks in the lobby of every McDonald's aren't just there because they look cool or futuristic. They are a direct defensive adaptation to sudden wage and labor mandates.
It is a perfect analogy for what HR departments are facing right now. The regulatory burden is reaching a breaking point, but obviously, instead of automating burger orders, mid-size offices have to figure out how to navigate a system where they are losing total control over their own internal payroll levers.
Let's talk about that loss of control, because this feels like trying to run a busy restaurant where the customers not only order the food, but they are legally allowed to walk into the kitchen and rearrange the cooking stations whenever they want.
That's a great way to put it.
Under these new rules, the employee now has total control over their salary selection while on leave, right?
Yes, it fundamentally rewrites the employer-employee power dynamic regarding compensation. Historically, an employer could design a predictable policy.
Right, the employee handbook.
Exactly. The handbook would say, hey, if you take leave, you must exhaust your earned sick leave first, then your paid time off, and only then do you transition to state benefits. The employer dictated the sequence to ensure predictable accounting and staffing continuity.
But Lessig made it abundantly clear that those policies are now illegal.
Completely illegal. The new law hands the remote control entirely to the employee. The employee has the absolute statutory right to dictate whether they want to use earned sick leave ESL, their accrued PTO, or the state family leave insurance.
Wow.
And furthermore, they get to dictate the exact sequence and timing of those buckets. The employer is reduced to merely pushing the button the employee points to.
So an employee could decide to use, like, 2 days of sick leave, switch to state FLI for 3 weeks because it pays a certain percentage, realize the tax implications aren't what they thought, and suddenly demand the employer switch them over to their PTO bucket.
Yes. And consider the administrative friction this creates.
I can't even imagine.
The employee might not fully understand the complex tax withholdings associated with state benefits versus standard payroll. They might make a choice, see their diminished paycheck, panic, and demand HR reverse the coding retroactively.
Which implies HR departments have to somehow anticipate these erratic choices just to keep the payroll software from crashing. But as Lessig pointed out, predicting human behavior is a fool's errand.
Unless you happen to have supernatural powers. Which brings us to Lessig's metaphor about the mentalist.
Yes. Oz Perlman, pronounced Oz like Pose from America's Got Talent. Lessig recounted this incredible story about being at a friend's 40th birthday party.
Right.
So Oz is performing, and before the show really starts, he seals 2 envelopes and leaves them in plain sight. Later, he walks up to a completely random guest and asks who is going to sing at the 50th birthday party. And the guest blurts out, Beyoncé.
A completely unprompted, totally chaotic variable.
Exactly. Then he turns to Lessig and asks, how many people are in this room right now? Lessig takes a guess and says, 65 people. When they finally open those sealed envelopes that had been sitting there the entire time, one piece of paper says Beyoncé and the other says 65.
It's a highly entertaining anecdote, but the strategic application is what actually matters here. Oz Perlman can predict the unpredictable. Human resources cannot.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Unless HR has Oz Perlman on payroll, they have absolutely no idea what an employee is going to select. So how on earth do they prepare for it without accidentally coercing the employee and getting sued?
They are walking into a massive liability trap, and this is where the financial stakes get genuinely terrifying. We are talking about the mechanism of retaliation claims.
Okay, lay it on us.
Lessig noted that recently, retaliation claims have cost employers upward of $660 million.
$660 million just for retaliation.
Because the legal definition of coercion or retaliation is incredibly broad under these statutes. I mean, imagine a well-meaning frontline manager. They see an employee struggling to fill out their leave paperwork.
Right.
The manager says, hey, you know, it's usually better for your paycheck if you just use your PTO first. That's how we've always done it.
That sounds like basic, helpful advice from a boss trying to look out for their team member.
To a plaintiff's attorney, that is illegal coercion. The manager is representing the company and directing the employee's salary selection, which violates their statutory right to total control.
Even if the manager meant well.
Intent doesn't matter. If the employee later feels they were pressured into a specific pay sequence that negatively impacted their taxes or their leave duration, they can claim the company retaliated against them or illegally interfered with their rights.
So the organization is entirely on the hook for whatever a rogue, well-intentioned manager says in the break room.
Precisely. Which means you cannot rely on state guidelines that won't exist until July, and you certainly cannot rely on the intuition of your management team. You need a structural defensive strategy in place right now.
Well, Lessig absolutely delivered on that front. He didn't just diagnose the problem, he provided a concrete 4-point action plan for employers to tackle before the July 17 deadline. Let's walk through how these 4 elements actually interlock, starting with policy and handbook edits.
The handbook is your first line of defense. And right now, most handbooks are active liabilities. Employers must conduct a surgical review of their written policies immediately.
To update the threshold numbers, right?
Yes, you have to update the language to reflect the lower 15-employee threshold and the new 250-hour eligibility metric. But more importantly, you have to actively strip out any legacy language that dictates how an employee must use their time.
So if your handbook still says employees are required to exhaust PTO before applying for state benefits.
You are publishing an illegal policy.
Okay, so you fixed the legal language. But words on a page don't mean much if the underlying architecture of your company can't actually execute the law. If the employee has total control over their salary selection, that brings us to the second action item, HRIS and claim form updates.
Yes, the technology side. That is a massive operational hurdle. Employers need to be on the phone with their payroll software vendors and their IT departments today.
Just to stress test the system, right? Like, can your software process an employee who codes their Monday and Tuesday as earned sick leave, their Wednesday as paid time off, and their Thursday and Friday as family leave insurance?
Exactly. And can it calculate the differing tax withholdings for each of those buckets simultaneously without crashing the entire payroll run?
Right. If the software forces HR to manually override the system every time an employee changes their mind, you are introducing the probability of human error.
Which inevitably leads to delayed paychecks and subsequent labor complaints. The technological infrastructure must be upgraded to handle extreme flexibility.
So, the handbook is clean, the software works. But that still doesn't solve the problem of the empty chair. If someone is out for 38 weeks, the work still has to get done. Which leads to the third piece of Lessig's strategy, FTE coverage analysis.
Right, full-time equivalent coverage.
Yeah.
How does a mid-sized company actually conduct this kind of forecasting? You have to look backward to look forward.
Meaning?
HR departments need to pull their historical absence data over the last 3 to 5 years. Look at the demographic trends and the utilization rates of leave within specific departments. You can't predict the exact individual, but you can identify historical patterns of vulnerability.
So if you know your warehouse team historically has a high rate of intermittent leave usage, you have to assume those durations are going to expand under the new law.
Yes. And once you identify those vulnerable departments, you must proactively engage with temporary staffing agencies right now.
Before the crisis hits.
Exactly. You need to establish contracts and pipelines for specialized temps. If you wait until your lead logistics coordinator goes out on a 38-week leave to start looking for a temp, your supply chain will collapse before you even schedule an interview.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most critical piece of the defensive strategy. We talked about the $660 million in retaliation claims. You can have the best HR armor in the world, but if a manager steps out of line and says, hey, we've always done it this way, they just handed the plaintiff's lawyer a 6-figure demand on a silver platter.
Which is why managerial training is the fourth step. It is the glue that holds the entire compliance strategy together. The mandate here is simple. Train your frontline managers to stop offering side deals.
Just stop talking about it completely.
Yes, they must be explicitly instructed that they are no longer authorized to advise employees on leave duration, salary selection, or state benefits.
They basically need to be trained to say one specific sentence. Let me connect you directly with human resources.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, communication is the ultimate key here. The managers need to understand that the laws are shifting the burden of compliance entirely onto the organization's shoulders.
Making ignorance a very expensive liability.
Extremely expensive. Every single conversation regarding leave must be funneled to a designated, highly trained HR professional who actually understands the updated statutes.
So, synthesizing everything we've unpacked from the summit. The July 17 deadline represents a seismic shift in New Jersey employment law. We are transitioning from an era of employer predictability into an era of total employee empowerment.
That's a great summary.
The thresholds are lower, the eligibility requirements are shockingly fast, the job protection is ironclad for up to 38 weeks, and the employee holds the absolute remote control over how they get paid during that time.
And we cannot stress enough that the official state regulations detailing the exact administrative procedures are still pending this July. The foundation is poured, but the state is still rearranging the furniture.
Which is why staying informed is not optional. You need to keep your eyes peeled for more impactful updates from Lessig as those regulations finally drop. And if you are staring at your handbook or your payroll software right now and realizing you have a massive compliance gap, do not hesitate to contact him or John Sharp at Hardenberg Insurance Group. Waiting for the state to clarify the rules while the deadline passes is just a recipe for disaster.
It truly is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
But, as we close this deep dive, I want to pivot away from the legal mechanics for a second and leave you with a broader strategic question to ponder on your own.
Okay, let's hear it.
We'd spent a lot of time analyzing the strict legal protections surrounding the single employee who takes that massive 38-week leave. The job protection, the salary control, the anti-retaliation rule.
Everything is designed to shield them, right?
Right. But consider the ecosystem of the business itself. What happens to the workplace culture? And, quite frankly, the mental health of the 14 other employees who were left behind?
Oh, wow. That's a heavy thought.
The state forces the business to keep that absent position open. But the deadlines don't stop. The clients still need their deliverables. How long can those 14 remaining team members absorb a year's worth of extra work, day in and day out, before the burnout destroys the very company the law is trying to regulate?